I guess let's open up the aperture here and talk a little bit about relations with China. We're obviously in a bit of a Cold War with them. We have tariffs, we have Taiwan, and then we have the sort of trade war going on here with exports of H-100s. Where do we want to start, gentlemen? And, Travis, you've got some you're one of probably 5 American entrepreneurs who ran an at-scale business with Uber and the DiDi relationship in China. So you have a unique position of understanding business in this, along with maybe Tim Cook and Elon are the only other 2 people who've really had an at-scale business there. Yeah. Maybe Disney. They have Disneyland there. Yeah. What's your take on the relationship and what's going on here geopolitically?
How's China going to operate differently than the U.S., Travis, from your experience, your point of view? Tell us a little bit about the culture and business ethics in China, particularly as it relates to AI.
So look, I had this thing. I'm going back almost 10 years here. Uber Day, we're running Uber China. And I mean, there's no way I could express the frenetic intensity of copying that they would do on everything that we would roll out in China. Mm. And it was so epically intense that I basically had a massive amount of respect for their ability to copy what we did. I just couldn't believe it. We would do real hard work, make it, we'd dial it, and it would be epic and it would be awesome. We'd roll it out. And then like 2 weeks later, boom, they've got it. A week later, boom, they've got it. And of course, I use that to drive our team. And there's so many great stories. I mean, we had like 400 Chinese nationals in Silicon Valley. At our offices in San Francisco, we had a whole floor for the China growth team, and it was primarily Chinese nationals. We had billboards on the 101 in Silicon Valley in Chinese, Uber billboards to join our team in Chinese to serve the homeland, right? Mm-hmm. It was like an all-out war. It was really epic. It was epic. And by the way, when you went to that floor in our office, you were in China. Like they rolled China style. Like the desks were literally smaller. Like the density of the space was China. Okay. So, but what happens is when you get really, really good at copying and that time gets tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, you eventually run out of things to copy. And then it flips
to creativity
and innovation. Now at the beginning, you know, it's sort of all over the place. Like the kind of innovation when it was new was like, what? You know, you're like, really? But as they exercise that muscle, it gets better and better and better. So if you want to know about the future of food, like online food delivery, you don't go to New York City. You go to Shanghai. Right?
What's an example of like something really innovative they're doing?
Doesn't Meituan do drone delivery and stuff?
Like, here's an example. If you went to offices like, let's say, Shanghai, Beijing, any of the major cities, Hangzhou, et cetera, the office buildings have hundreds of lockers around their perimeter. So that everything that you get, whether it be food or anything else, but especially food, is just the couriers drop them off in these lockers at the office buildings. And then there are a whole other set of people that are sort of like inter-office runners that then bring it to your office. As an example, like, and when you see it, you're like, and it's epically efficient. And it's, you know, they're taking advantage of their economics on labor and things like this. It wouldn't exactly work that way here. But a lot of the innovation you will see coming out on Uber Eats or DoorDash, like the stuff that's coming out now is stuff that existed 3 years ago, 4 years ago in China, maybe longer. So like eventually you cross that threshold of copying and you are innovating and then you're leading. And I think we see that in a whole bunch of different places.
Yeah, here's a look at these smart lockers that you can see. You're just available for sale when you go online. But yeah, these things are crazy. And you've experimented with those as well. Didn't you have like a commissary concept in DTLA?
Well, look, so we got a couple things. So we have in every one of our facilities, and we've got, you know, hundreds of them. we'll have lockers there. So the courier then waves their phone in front of a camera. The right locker pops open. They get the food from there and they go. The courier pickup is asynchronous from production of food. You don't have lines anymore. There's no more lines, which then speeds up delivery, shortens the amount of time, it reduces how much money you spend on couriers. And we've got a whole other thing. This doesn't work it probably wouldn't work in China because, well, for a lot of reasons, but let me explain what it is. It's called picnic, where if you are in an office building, you order food, you go to a website, you order whatever it is from 100 different restaurants. Those restaurants happen to be in my facilities. And there'll be one courier that goes to one of our facilities and picks up 50 orders at a time, brings it to an office, there's a shelf on every floor. You get notified when your food arrives, and it arrives the same time every day. And you just go to the shelf, get it on your floor, and dip it right back into your meeting, saving people time at the office, giving them selection on food, especially in food deserts. But even going, like there's a Sweetgreen right down there in my office right now. I could save 20 minutes by just using our own service versus doing that. And you get it the same price because the courier economics, the courier is delivering 50 orders at a time. So courier costs go basically to zero.
What do we think of the export controls here? Should we, Chamath, be maybe banning more H100s or other chipsets going there, or is that futile?
I don't know the answer to that, and I think Sachs and President Trump will make a good decision. But here's the curious case of the export controls. Nick, I sent you a couple of tweets if you want to just bring this up. So the first thing that people are claiming is that DeepSeek is getting access to a bunch of NVIDIA GPUs using Singapore as a backdoor. So essentially, you create a Singaporean shell company, you place an order with NVIDIA, NVIDIA fulfills that into Singapore, and then the chips go someplace.
Uh-oh.
And so there's a bunch of examples where people are saying that you're talking about up to a quarter of all NVIDIA revenue goes into Singapore. And the speculation right now is that 100% of those then go into China, which is an enormous claim because that's a huge amount of NVIDIA's revenue. Now, the interesting thing is if you actually try to understand, well, maybe that's not true and maybe it's sitting inside of Singapore, this is where that kind of unravels. So just to be clear, like Singapore is about 250 or 260 square miles. Like it's like a small place.
Also the TikTok headquarters.
And I tried to find out how many data centers are in Singapore, and it's about 100. And so you would think that, okay, well, what does that mean? 100 could mean anything. But then you look at the energy, and they publish that. And all of those 100 data centers consume about 876 megawatts. So these are small data centers, right? And the entire industry is like a $1.5–2 billion revenue business. So I do think that Sachs and the administration are going to have to dig into this and figure out what their opinion should be. But there is clearly a ton of these chips going into Singapore. I don't think anybody knows where they end up. And the question is, what does America think about that? And why did we implement these export controls in the first place? And if there's a simple backdoor, how do you want to react?
If the U.S. finds a path, I mean, let's talk about like what happened with sanctions in Russia and other prior kind of sanctioning efforts around the world. But as you kind of close the floodgates and close access, the buyer or the receiver of those goods or that capital are going to look elsewhere. They're going to look to create a market somewhere else. And so if we do cut off access to NVIDIA chips, we do cut off access to U.S. exports, are we not kind of recognizing that the second order effect of that is that China will take IP that they've stolen, copies that they've made, to Travis's point, and develop and build out their own fabs, and they'll find ways to copy the ASML technology. And, you know, at the end of the day, there's a lot to put together. And I know it's deeply technically complex, but if ever there were a group of people in the history of human civilization to pull it off, it's probably the modern Chinese, to be able to say, let's go build our own.
It's worse than that.
Our own infrastructure.
This is a great point, but it's worse than that. The models today are capable of designing chips for you that don't rely on the most complicated technologies that ASML creates. I mean, look, one of the luckiest things that happened to Grok was we designed our chip at 14 nanometer, which is effectively in the spectrum of technology like VHS and beta. So we chose a simple technology stack to build towards. The latest cutting edge chips at like 2 nanometer that use these complicated ASML machines, it's not clear that the yield is actually that good. So why would you spend all that money? And if China is forced to engineer its way around it, yeah, Freeberg, the answer to your question is they'll use these models to design chips that can be manufactured in simple ways, and they'll make simple stuff. So
I'm just not sure it solves the problem, is my point.
Well, it doesn't. And this is why I think like it doesn't solve the real problem, which is how do we incentivize people in America to really out-engineer and out-innovate?
Competition.
Or AI ushers in an era of extraordinary abundance, and that abundance ultimately reduces the drive for conflict, and things are better off.
Or the other version as well is that China could just bear the cost as a central authority of building an incredibly great model, right? And they will spend all the money, and then they will tell the Chinese companies, you can distill from this model for free because we have a golden vote and a seat on your board anyways, which is effectively de facto what happens if you get big enough in China. So there's that possibility as well, where one central authority bears the capex of creating something that then everybody else can draft off of.